Welcome to BitLyft. I'm Casey, and today I will be guiding us along our journey on demystifying cybersecurity acronyms and what they mean. Here with me today, I have BitLyft CEO Jason Miller.
Hello.
And our Director of SOC, Mike Skeef.
Happy to be here.
Gentlemen, cybersecurity is full of alphabet soup, so let's jump right in and catch everybody up to speed on what they all mean. We'll start with Jason. There are a lot of DRs out there, and we're not talking about doctors.
Yeah.
So please explain to us what MDR, EDR, NDR, and XDR are and what they all mean.
Yeah. You kind of do need a doctorate degree to figure out our acronyms sometimes. It's pretty pathetic, but let's start with MDR. So Managed Detection and Response. It was really created out of the need for managed cybersecurity, security analysts to be in the background, helping manage the tools and help with detection. That included threat hunting. It included the creation of new rules, new alarms and alerts, and also tweaking and tuning old alarms and alerts or rules. That pretty much is a full-time job. And so what happened is as you look over the space over the last few years, managed detection and response has become very popular. Some businesses today exist on the scene that weren't even around 5 to 7 to 10 years ago. And it's because they solely created their business model to be a MDR player, focused in on managed detection and response. Now, the response portion is where I would say each one of these acronyms, the managed portion needs context. The detection portion, I think we'd all agree we want to be able to detect threats. And then the actual response or remediation portion, that R, needs context. So the remediation or the response portion here could actually be, hey, we detected it. We know without 100% shadow of a doubt that this is a real alarm and alert, and it needs assistance. It either needs human assistance or it needs some sort of maybe automation attached to it to help with remediation of what it detected. It could also mean that it just simply sends an email or alert to the team members, letting them know that this detection detected something and it's responding to it. Now, in our BitLyft content, we actually mean a full 100% life cycle of this. So where we will go from management and monitoring to detection to remediation, and meaning that we actually want to stop that threat dead in its tracks. We don't want to allow it to continue to run rampant in the environment. And so as we're providing definition to these acronyms, we look to actually stop the threat actor, not clean it up quite yet, because we want to maybe take samples and understand what it was trying to do, where it came from, things like that. But if you can imagine throwing the jail cell down around that threat actor, that is our whole goal with the R and remediation. So that is MDR. That's a full, exhaustive definition.
It sounds rather scientific, which is interesting.
Yeah.
What is that sort of in relation, or what is EDR, and how does that fit into the detection response realm?
Yeah, so EDR is extremely important today, and you can get this both in a managed EDR. You can do it if you're just trying to manage EDR all on your own as an IT team. But EDR is Endpoint Detection and Response. The EDRs that you see today, again, there are new modern EDRs on the marketplace. I think of like SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, Carbon Black, some of these that really didn't exist, or they were just coming on the scenes 10 years ago. They have an algorithm engine that helps them figure out malicious software literally within moments, like nanoseconds of execution and processes on endpoints. You need this today because signature-based detection threat models are a thing of the past. I worked at a company that I won't mention that was a endpoint security product. Great product. It was a great product for its time. Lots of VB100 awards. But the thing here is that we're fighting malware today in a completely new sense than what we were 10 years ago. And so a modern EDR to fight the malware that we're fighting these days is extremely important. And those ones that I mentioned, I'm not endorsing those. I'm just highlighting the difference between older endpoint detections that were around back in the late 90s and early 2000s. If you're still relying on those to deliver a best-in-class or an enterprise-grade product, I would encourage you to look elsewhere, on the EDR side.
And I mean, it just goes along with the theme of what we're talking about today, and that is, the alphabet soup of it all is continuing to evolve, as are your providers of all of these. All of these. So explain to us a little bit about NDR.
Okay. So NDR gets into your network detection and response. Today, the network is much different than it was when I started in 1996 as a network engineer, system administrator, right? The network today is both, on premise, it's out in the cloud, it's your AWS networking, it's your Microsoft Azure networking, it's your networking that you might have at a hosted website, and maybe some in the AWS space. These are your VPCs, your virtual private clouds, and things of that nature. So we see a lot of organizations that are doing VPNs from their on-premise to their clouds. And so you have to be able to do, as you think about NDR today, we have this vastly different networked topology today. And so you may have a SaaS app that there is networking to and from that. If you have any sort of VPN tunnels from those SaaSes or those clouds, they're really an extension of your on-premise network. Or you may say, hey, we have completely jumped into the cloud and we're 100% cloud, especially today is a lot of organizations where the workers are 100% remote. In those cases, you may not have a on-premise traditional network topology. And in that case, though, you have a cloud that you still need to protect, and you now have a whole bunch of small micro networks. And that is getting to where you've got the employees or your remote workers and whatever is happening on their network, at home. And you want to make sure that their machine doesn't get infiltrated and then connect back into your network that you're utilizing as the business. And you could say, my gosh, this isn't going to happen. That's not the way that it works. Well, I think what we've all realized is that the criminal hackers out there are extremely crafty, and they will find a way in. And it's just a matter of time before you start to see malware using threat vectors through, home networks that are not protected like the traditional enterprise network was, and getting to the point where we have threats, vectoring through endpoints that aren't properly protected, and then getting to assets that are out in a cloud SaaS offering. So that network detection and response is really important, I would say. But it is network focused. Mm-hmm. So it is your layer 2, layer 3 of your network focused. We're not talking about application layer quite yet.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be quite expansive, like you said, with the number of IoT devices becoming connected with remote workers. So I appreciate you explaining that.
Absolutely.
Last one I'm going to ask you to touch on, Jason, XDR.
Yeah. So XDR is really think of EDR, think of NDR, think of your application layer, detection and response. XDR is the purpose of this acronym is to incorporate all avenues, all aspects of detection and response. Is that X? You fill in the blank. This is the reason why is because we need to reduce the amount of gaps that we have inside of our monitoring and the management of the detection and response methodology. So in order to reduce those gaps, we have to actually look at everything. You have to look at the network. You have to look at the application layer. You have to look at your SaaS apps in your cloud. You have to look at on-prem. You have to look at the endpoint. And we're starting to even see where you have to put a little bit more emphasis on, iPads and the actual tablet space, because as the users move and adopt the criminal hackers are moving to that adoption methodology as well. So now you start to see malware on, tablets and things of that nature, especially with the way that like Microsoft has incorporated both the laptop and the tablet, in the same type of device, and the OS is compatible in both. Now you can sort of write malware for one OS. But that XDR is really the coverage of everything. It's the endpoint, the network, your firewalls, your cloud, your SaaS, all of those pieces into one detection and response methodology.
Wow, that sounds like it'd be a pretty powerful tool.
Yes, it is.
I'm glad you mentioned SaaS, actually, because we are moving on into the S's. SaaS, of course, software as a service.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But we're going to push the wake button on Mike Skeeth over here, and he's going to tell us about the S's. So, Mike, as director of SOC for BitLyft, I think it's best that we hand this over to you so we can understand SIM, SOC, and SOAR and how they might apply to our organization.
So to start off with SIM and the Security Information and Event Management System, the very basis of what SIM is, it's the place to collect the data. As you put logs and data into your SIM, you can now start to define how you're going to event and how you are going to investigate incidents, and you're able to do that all in this one system. As you see in the space where we're now calling it next gen SIM, it's because they're adding more features to the initial offering of just collect all the junk. And now we can provide intelligence on it. We can provide rule engines on top of it. We can provide notification systems on top of it. We can provide reporting and compliance and all kinds of different features that go under that. But at the basis, it's just the thing that collects all the data. And so no matter which one that you go with, which tool you're working with, as those applications continue to evolve and continue to add more features, now you need a SOC. And that is your Security Operations Center. You need a group of people that are responsible to manage that, to work with your networking team, your internal assets to make sure that they're all logging, they're all parsing correctly. When updates occur, those rules and ingestion paths are continuing to be updated and matured. They can also be on the lookout for new threat vectors, what new rules need to exist, what new attacks might be in the wild that can be incorporated into that tool or really any of those tools that Jason had mentioned earlier as well. And then we get to SOAR, which is the Security Orchestration Automation Response tool. Because if you have your own SOC internally or you're leveraging a managed SOC, managed SIMs, any of the DRs, you want them to be able to respond quickly and effectively. And you need a platform, a tool to be able to write automations, create the the correct executables to stop the threat or advance the team into the information that they need to provide an impact to that threat in so many different ways. And it really just depends on the sources that we're talking back to. But if the account's compromised, we want to be able to quarantine that account immediately, as fast as we can. And so you want a tool that's like a SOAR functionality so that we can write code back to the root cause and stop the threat in its tracks. I think Jason put it really well at the very beginning of his MDR of putting that jail cell around the event, around the.
It's perfect. And I found it fitting that our sirens here in St. John's, Michigan decided to go off just as you were talking about SOAR, because it is quite a big alarm there that you guys take care of over there in our own SOC. Yeah. So Mike, thank you for explaining that to us all. As cybersecurity is such a vast endeavor, organizations often lack the human capital to give them the best possible coverage. So they turn to service-based models. I know we previously mentioned SaaS, but Jason, give us an overview of what MSPs are and MSSPs.
Yeah, so this is a good question. We get this a lot. We get asked if we're an MSP or an MSSP, and BitLyft is not an MSP or MSSP. You know, an MSP started out to help really deliver managed services as a provider to multiple customers. And that could range from a multitude of things, you know, whether it's consulting, you know, doing firewalls, putting in network gear, like installing your access points in your office and things like that. This managed service provider was sort of a generalist, right? And they could come in and help assist with a lot of IT things that maybe the organization didn't have time or the resources or the talent to do all on their own. Then what happened over time, you know, MSPs existed for, you know, the last 20, 30 years. You know, you could go back all the way to, you know, the early to mid 80s, and there were some initial MSPs starting out on the space, right? MSPs basically started morphing into MSSPs, and they added the S in there as a security service provider. They realized that, hey, firewalls were starting to come on the scene. You know, I mean, you had in the mid 90s where organizations were plugging their networks into the internet without a firewall. And what was happening is we realized, oh my gosh, we all needed firewalls, and we needed antivirus, and we needed all these things. And so an MSSP was really a morph. It was an addition to what they were already doing, right? And so an MSSP is typically handling the management of the security aspects of the organization. So like helping manage the security aspects of the firewall, helping manage the antivirus or the anti-malware, maybe even helping with your policies and your configurations, you know, but they do a broad set of security context related things. And one of the reasons why we are not an MSSP is because I truly believe in my heart of hearts is it can cause dilution of your team members. If all of a sudden you have X number of team members inside of your MSSP, and they're doing everything from consulting to managing firewalls to managing endpoint detection and response, your antivirus. They're helping vulnerability scans. They're helping with pen testing. They're helping out with other types of assessments and audits. Next thing you know, a person like Mike or somebody on Mike's team would have to be what we know as a jack of all trades and a master of none. And what we have done a good job here at BitLyft in, and I'm just providing context here as you look at this, is we have developed subject matter expertise at SIM, SOC, SOAR aspects because they need a mindset behind them properly driving them, right? So I would just, as you're looking at MSPs and MSSPs in the space, I would look at it and make sure that they are well built, like that they have the breadth and depth behind them to actually execute what you're looking for them to do.
Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate that. Let's round out today's discussion with a little bit of insight into process. So, Mike, let us know what UEBA is and how threat hunting works.
Okay. So UEBA is a focus from the endpoints and move that focus to the users. So in your endpoint detection, your X detection, your N detection, all of those talked about systems and applications and processes. And we take all of that and we assign users to it, and then we focus on the user. So it was just a few years ago that UEBA was like a unicorn in the security space. And really all it is applying the focus to the users and trying to identify what devices the user uses, where they exist in your cloud applications, and then putting that all into a persona for that user so you can track them and track them against their peers as well, because that's also a good use case for seeing if what they're doing is normal. If you have a salesperson doing things that seem to be like the network team would be doing, that's a concern. They're crossing boundaries that we should establish as not a correct behavior analysis. And then on the threat hunting side, threat hunting is always looking for the thing that nobody knows that exists yet. So just by definition, it's impossible to do, but that's what we spend a large amount of our time doing, is figuring out what threats exist when nobody knows that the threat exists yet.
Sounds like some really heavy detective stuff you have going on there in the SOC. And we really appreciate our in-house SOC for all they do in terms of threat intelligence hunting and everything that they provide to our customers.
I mean, UEBA is important there when you're doing threat hunting, right? I mean, you're establishing baselines of what's normal, what's not normal, right? And that can help, the SOC teams identify abnormalities, when they're threat hunting. So that's a really good point to be able to understand, like, how am I going to be able to utilize that? And why threat hunting is as difficult as it is because you're sifting through millions of log data, trying to find the needle within the needle of the haystack, right? So yeah, but I agree with Mike. It's an extremely important thing to do, but it's also probably the most difficult thing to do. Is you're looking for 0 days all the time.
And what exactly is a 0 day? How do you explain that,
Mike?
It just goes back to that statement of the thing that doesn't exist yet. If it's not widely known to the public, but it is a attack vector, sometimes criminals hide those 0 days and keep them so that they can launch them on a moment's notice and impact a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
Once they use it, it's now known. Once they get caught, it's known, it'll be patched, it'll be fixed. But until it's used and no white hat hacker finds it, it remains a 0 day, ready for hacking.
Yeah.
Well, that's incredibly scary.
Yeah. And I would even add to the technical definition of a 0 day is something that does not have a CVE attached to it yet, which is a vulnerability exploitable code, right? So if you look at, like, if you use a vulnerability scanner today and you scan your environment, it will give a CVE number to everything that's in your environment, a low, a medium, and a high. You can then move off of that and start to realize, like, I need to patch all of these highs first that are a CVE score of a high, because they provide the most risk to the organization, right? So if our SOC team identifies activity that is not necessarily associated with a CVE yet, then that would be considered a 0 day. But Mike's right in that most of the time those things are used sparingly until they want to really exploit something.
Well, it sounds like threat actors are getting a little bit more difficult to catch these days. So thank you guys for taking us through all of the different acronyms. And trust me, there's plenty more that we won't have time to get here today. But out of all of that alphabet soup, what would you say is most important for building out your SOC or your security stack? Mm-hmm. And how do you determine which one's right for your particular organization?
Yeah, Mike, you want to go first?
So what's most important to build out your SOC?
Well, your security stack in general.
Sure. Yeah. And it depends on where you're at today and what gaps you have. So you have to do a thorough assessment of your overall security posture so that you can determine what's important, what you need to add to or improve upon. Today, if you don't have EDR, you have to do that first. You don't use MFA. That would be next on my book. But as you start to pick apart all of the different nuances of your security stack, it really depends on where you're at today, what talent you have internally to assist with it, and who you want to partner with to do aren't in your control.
Right. It's like handle internally what you can handle internally, and what you might be able to have a partner handle. Jason, what do you have to expand on that?
Yeah, I would say, like Mike mentioned, a quick assessment. This can be something where you might sit down with your team and just whiteboard out, like, what are we doing today from a cybersecurity perspective, and like, what are we not doing today? You identify those things, and then you start to ask yourself, what are we capable of handling internally? And that is a very valid question that I think people skip over, because what's the first impression? Well, we can just add this to our plate. We can just add this to our plate. We can just add that to our plate. And next thing you know, you didn't really address the current things that are on your plate, because I would assume that you're probably not like lacking work today. Most IT people are telling us, I could work 40, 50, 60, 70 hours a week and probably still not keep up, right? So the big things that I would encourage you to take away when you're thinking about, should we build a SOC or should we build out the security stack, right? Is we need to identify what we're doing today and ask ourselves those things. But then also, what can we take on internally, and what should we partner with an outside company? We often find companies that are doing much more than what they should be. And if you went and shared this with the business, this is another question that I would encourage you guys to discuss it at your organization is, does this distract us from our business goals? If you're a company that is making rubber tires, and all of a sudden, you have a SOC team, and there's 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people in there with all the software and everything, does that make sense for you to have a micro business within the larger business, right? And for whatever reason, you might decide, yes, it makes sense, and you might decide no, it doesn't. But you should be asking yourself, at which point does it make sense to partner with a subject matter expert company that does this all day, every day, just like your business might be a subject matter expertise at what it's building widgets, right? You fill in the blank of whatever you're building or creating, and stay in that lane because you're going to do best at it, right? We just see a lot of companies that are not really doing a great job because they don't have the opportunity to focus full time, on these cybersecurity threats, the vectors, and everything that goes into it. And so what happens is you get 1 or 2 or 3 people that are focused on cybersecurity, but they're really not doing a great job at it. And nobody wants to admit that they're not doing a great job at it. But at the same token, are we really executing how we should be? Or would we be executing better if we would have partnered with another company? And so those are things that I would encourage you to talk through as you're building this. And then another major point here is that not all tools are created equally important. As Mike was saying, there's really this priority list in our mind of like, in today's day and age, you absolutely have to have MFA. I mean, we have to have two-factor authentication. You need an endpoint detection and response methodology simply because the endpoints are what's moving around today in so many, non-secure environments. And so there are some of these things that tool is going to be unequally more important than, say, another tool. And you might really feel like you need that tool in your environment, but you cannot do without some of these other tools in your environment.
Yeah.
A couple of other pieces of that pie of what's the most important is what pain are you dealing with today? If there's any pain that you're experiencing today, that's some of the first things we want to attack to get that pain resolved so you as a business can get back to making the widget that you're supposed to be making. And the other thing is time to commit to that. So you might decide, we can do this internally, but would it be a year project where bringing along the right partner would remove it down to like a month or 2 month project instead? Those are all pieces of the pie that kind of figure out what's most important and which to layer on.
Right. It sounds like it really is contingent upon business. And as Jason mentioned, and you as well, Mike, just taking an assessment can get you started in the right direction. I know we have an assessment right on our website. Mm-hmm. I know there's a lot of other assessments out there that are hugely important. So yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like, guys.
And if I can expand on one other thing, which is time to value. If you have a couple people, we hear from a lot of clients, we have a small team. And so if you're saying to yourself, we have a small team, what I would encourage you to know is that you're not alone. Most organizations have somewhere between 0 cybersecurity folks on their team and like 5. And the 5 is like, there's some outliers where they have 20 or 30 people in their cybersecurity team, but those are at very, very large companies that have the budget, right? And so if you're in the bucket of somewhere between the 0 to 5, you're not alone. You're actually the majority, right? You're not the minority. Mm-hmm. And so does it make sense for the time to value? And what I mean by that is if Mike here is tracking down some sort of threatening activity, and Mike spends the whole entire day, tracking that down, and he ultimately determines that was not threatening, would you say, well, gosh, I just wasted the day? Or would you say, I just learned some impeccable information, but it only applied to me and my organization, right? Whereas a company like BitLyft, when Mike takes a whole day and spends on that, and he ultimately determines that was not threatening, but he learned a whole bunch of other things along the way, that's applicable to hundreds of our customers at the same time. And then Mike may decide, well, I'm going to go write some rules that help detect some of the other behavior that I learned that day, and maybe even some automated incident response modules, right? So now all of a sudden, you're getting the economies of scale, at a company like BitLyft. And I'm not pushing BitLyft here, but what I'm stating is that, again, we've got to partner with subject matter expertise when it comes to service-based companies, or it comes to how to build or maybe not build a SOC. Simply because if you look at yourself and say, if I spent the whole entire day on this, would myself or my team members feel like I wasted the day, right? Or that time. So time to value is a very big question we need to ask ourselves.
Yeah, that's the quintessential efficiency model of how to do things. So yeah. I appreciate you adding that in there, Jason. But yeah, that's the gist of our journey along demystifying cybersecurity acronyms. So BitLyft, I know our website's chock full of additional information as well, checklist, and like I said, the assessment. So if there's something that you guys were looking to see and maybe we didn't answer here, feel free to drop us a line there, and we'll see how we can help. But for myself, Mike, and Jason, thank you for joining us here today, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, everyone.